Last week, I told you about this diabetic man who had his arm broken during a hypoglycemic crisis by the Sebastopol Police Department. There. Are you happy now? I said it correctly. I think. Well, now I'm starting to think if maybe breaking arms is some kind of new policy within certain police departments after another lawsuit has been filed, this time against the city of Covington and several of its police officers. This federal lawsuit claims a Covington woman's arm was broken so severely that she had to have a metal rod placed in her arm after yet another unjust arrest. Hey, I'm America's attorney. I've been a lawyer for over 24 years. I've helped way more than 1.2 million people, and I've even got a rod in one of my bones. So let's take a look at this lawsuit and the crazy events that led up to it. Kathleen Kites is a Covington, Kentucky resident who, up until October of 2024, was living what appeared to be a normal life outside the public eye. She isn't a politician or a celebrity. She's presented in the lawsuit as an everyday citizen who suddenly found herself at the center of not one, but two traumatic encounters with local police in one day. So obviously, that day sucks. Her complaint describes her not as someone with a criminal record or a pattern of run-ins with law enforcement, but as an ordinary woman whose home, body, and rights were violated in a span of less than 24 hours. Kathleen's nightmare began on October 26, 2024, when she was at home in her apartment. The lawsuit explains that Kites heard a loud banging in the hallway. Curious, she opened the door and saw officers from the Covington PD pounding on her neighbor's door. When they noticed her, the officers suddenly shifted their focus, demanding to know where her neighbor was. Kathleen told them the truth. She had no idea. But instead of moving on, they accused her of hiding him inside the apartment. Her apartment. Before she could shut the door, the officers shoved their feet into the doorway and forced their way in. According to the lawsuit, they had no warrant, definitely no consent, and no emergency that would have justified a warrantless entry. Still, they searched her apartment as if she were a suspect, ignoring her protests. I want to explain what police officers' rights actually are in this situation. You can't just come into your house without a judge issuing a warrant that says that they can. And if they can't get a judge to say so, they can just ask politely. JK, they can even be rude. But if you don't give them consent, they can't come in. So either the judge gives them permission or you do, and that's pretty much it. Actually, there is one other situation if there's like some type of emergency where someone is currently being injured, like someone is having a crime committed against them inside a home, or they have a justifiable belief that evidence is currently being destroyed, like if they see a bunch of smoke coming out of the chimney and they know there's supposed to be a bunch of documents in there or something like that. Or if they're in hot pursuit of a felon. But none of those instances were present in this situation with Kathleen. And I would imagine that if Chapter 2 didn't happen later that night, we would never know Kathleen's name. I mean, all they did was violate her constitutional right. Whoops. It's not like they actually injured her. Oh, wait. What? Just after midnight, meaning a few hours later, in the early morning on October 27th, Kathleen's night took an even darker turn. Still reeling from the earlier intrusion and the emotional fallout of discovering her boyfriend's infidelity, she decided not to go all the way back home. She parked her boyfriend's truck, one that he had given her permission to use, a couple of blocks away from her home to clear her head. That's when officers Doug Ulrich and Sean Sinacori approached her vehicle. According to several news reports, someone had called to request a welfare check on Kites, claiming that she was suicidal. But according to her lawsuit, despite that information, the officers didn't approach calmly or professionally. Instead, they escalated immediately, shouting at her, insulting her, and even calling her an a-hole. What happened next is the moment that anchors this entire case. Body cam footage shows Ulrich lunging at Kites, grabbing her arm, and twisting it so violently behind her back that it snapped. The complaint says the break was obvious both audibly and visually on the body cam footage. And you can hear Ulrich reportedly blurt out, "Oh," when it happened.
Oh my God! Let go my arm! You let go my arm! I think you're
But instead of stopping, he continued yanking on the already broken arm while Kathleen screamed in pain. The injuries were not minor. I mean, anything but. Kites needed nearly 40 staples to close the wound after she had to have that metal rod surgically inserted into her arm to stabilize the massive fracture. Now, beyond the physical damage, the lawsuit points to the sheer recklessness of the encounter. There was no warrant, no probable cause, and no legitimate reason for her to be treated as if she were dangerous. For Kathleen, this wasn't just a frightening moment on the street. It was a brutal, life-altering assault by officers sworn to protect and serve. Supposedly. Almost a year later, Kathleen has filed a sweeping federal lawsuit against the city of Covington, its police department, and those officers involved. At its core, the lawsuit argues that her 4th and 14th Amendment rights were trampled when police forced their way into her apartment without a warrant and then later broke her arm during an unlawful arrest. But it goes much further than that. Kites lays out 11 different causes of action, starting with excessive force under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, the federal civil rights statute. She also brings a Monell claim accusing the city of fostering a culture of impunity by failing to train, supervise, discipline officers, or execute them. No, that's terrible. I can't say that. I don't say that. Take that part out. I'm talking about the officers like Doug Ulrich, who she says has a long track record of violent behavior that was not only ignored, but rewarded with promotions and raises. The complaint also piles on a host of state law claims, things like battery, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, false imprisonment, and false arrest. Now, on top of all that, she specifically calls out the illegal search of her residence, which she argues had no legal basis and left her fearful in her own home. Remember, if she was comfortable going home, she maybe doesn't have this terrible interaction later on the street at night. Taken together, the lawsuit paints a picture of systemic failure where misconduct wasn't the exception, but the product of an environment that tolerated and even encouraged it. Kites is asking for compensatory damages to cover her medical expenses, her lost wages, and pain and suffering, as well as punitive damages designed to hold the officers and the city accountable. The lawsuit doesn't frame Kathleen Kites' experience as like a one-off. It argues that what happened to her reflects a deeper, systemic problem with the Covington PD. At the center of this narrative is Officer Doug Ulrich, who is described as having a long record of violent encounters and unconstitutional searches. And one imagines a tiny brain. The word they bleeped out was brain, I promise. Doug's personnel file, made public through a different lawsuit by a Covington citizen, shows a suspension order that claims that Officer Ulrich was hired September 3rd, 2011, and has had 7 previous accidents involving police vehicles. 4 of the accidents were at fault. The file also describes Doug's violation of his 1-day suspension by working 5 hours of traffic overtime and using excessive force, going all the way back to 2014, when Officer Ulrich was involved in a use of force with his taser, where the suspect was running, not showing active aggression towards the officer. Kathleen's complaint says that despite these incidents and more, Ulrich was promoted, given raises, and even trusted with training other officers. That detail is critical because it suggests not just tolerance of misconduct, but institutional reinforcement of it. Kites' filing points to a department where excessive force isn't an anomaly, but part of a pattern, with supervisors like Chief Brian Valenti accused of looking the other way. The lawsuit now moves into the early stages of federal litigation, where the city of Covington will almost certainly file motions to dismiss or to limit the scope of the claims. Definitely in their crosshairs will be those state law claims, which may be barred by qualified immunity. If the case survives those initial hurdles, discovery will open, giving both sides access to critical evidence like the body cam footage, medical records, and Ulrich's disciplinary history, some of which already paints a very troubling picture. Obviously, as we look at this, we have to think about how much her claim might be worth. And just so you can throw up whatever you recently ate, here's that zipper they put on her arm one more time. Now, some states have damage caps for pain and suffering, and some states have damage caps for punitive damages. Kentucky actually has a constitutional provision that prevents caps on damages in almost every case, except, wait for it, claims against the government. Of course, there's a Kentucky law that caps pain and suffering damages, $200,000 for claims against the government, although you can get up to $350,000 if there are multiple incidents, which Kathleen certainly has from that day. Now, I would love for her lawyer to figure out a way around this disgusting limitation because it's obviously unjust. There's not a single sane person watching this video. Sorry, I got distracted. What I meant to say was that there's not a single sane person watching this video who would consent to having their arm broken for merely $250,000. Cue the zipper. Hey, what are your thoughts on Kathleen's arrest and on this subsequent lawsuit? Do you think that real change can be achieved in the Covington PD? Do me a favor and drop your pro se opinion down below in the comments. And don't forget, while you're down there, to lawyer up with me, America's Attorney, by hitting that subscribe button. I will be back soon with more legal breakdowns. You won't want to miss it, and I'll see you then. Sebastopol. Sebastopol. Sebastopol.